I wanted to take a little step back and then move into the red letter study. But, you know, we've been just kind of working through Matthew 7, the last chapter of the Sermon on the Mount. And we've been going back over. It's kind of like the partridge in a pear tree thing, where you keep going back to the beginning and then you go through and add one, and then you come back to the beginning and you add one. That's what we've been kind of doing. We've been starting and adding the new target verse for each Sunday, but going back to the beginning, because Matthew 7, 1 through 12 all works as a contiguous block. It's a block. It's a block of meaning. And so they all connect. And verse 12 that we're going to be talking about today kind of sums up and puts a big exclamation point right on the end of these passages. So I wanted to step back and just kind of talk about the overall theme of where Jesus is really going in all of this, because it's so easy to get lost in the weeds, so easy to get lost in the details, and we don't see the forest for the trees. So you might have heard this one before, that everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. Heard that one before? I think someone made a song out of it, a country song. Of course, it would be a country song. But do you know who's actually said it first? I was surprised. It was Joe Louis. How many know who Joe Louis was? Famous boxer. Okay, he was actually the heavyweight champion from like 37 to 49. That's 1937 to 1949. And beat Max Schelling in the famous second bout, right in 38 at the run-up to the Second World War. Famous guy, but he said, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. And he's underscoring this huge truth here. And that truth is that we all fear death, don't we? To some degree. I mean, some of us say, no, I don't fear death because, we have this confidence in our faith. But if you were right up against it, I don't know, you might have a little second guess there. We do fear death. Why? Why do we fear death? What is it? I mean, we as finite creatures, we fear death because every single thing that we can think of that makes us us, makes us ourselves, describes us as unique individuals that we see as our identity, everything that means to be us, is taken at the moment of death. All of our roles, all of our accomplishments, all of our attributes as a person, everything that we can think of that we see as our identity, who we are, is taken at the moment of death. And you got to wonder, well, then what's left? If all that stuff is gone, if all that stuff hits the headstone, stops, and I keep going, do I keep going? How do I keep going? Who am I if I'm not all of that? Those are the existential, unanswerable, mysterious questions that we will never be certain of in this life. And that's what scares us. Death is a moment that everything we can think of as ourselves is taken. It's actually the moment when our minds stop thinking. Not just thinking about who we are, but it's the moment our minds stop thinking. It stops imagining us as individuals. Our whole sense of self falls away at a point of death. That's why it's so scary. We want to go to heaven, but we don't want to go through that. This is why contemplation is so important. Contemplation is the systematic practice of stepping away from everything that our minds are, everything that our minds think about ourselves, about everything else. We step away from our sense of self. Contemplation is actually called, in some circles, the little death, because we're practicing on a regular basis for our actual death. What does it feel like to step away from everything that we think is us? Now, we've all had experiences of what that feels like. You call them peak moments if you want to. What's a peak moment? It's just a moment that just is so intense that it just blows everything out of our heads. And we've gone through the laundry list before. It can be when that baby was put on your chest. It can be a sunset. It can be when you're hanging from a cliff face 1,000 feet above the desert floor. It can be anything that is really intense, loud music, falling in love. You've experienced those things before. And in those experiences, if they have created those vivid memories, if you can close your eyes and see that moment again, and if you think about what you were thinking at that moment, the answer is nothing. Because if you were thinking about something at that moment, it wouldn't be a peak moment. You wouldn't have the same kind of imprinting. You wouldn't have had the same kind of sense of release and freedom and meaning and purpose and fulfillment. Why do people chase these kinds of intensities? Because it makes them feel alive. But it's not the extreme sport. It's not the extreme intense circumstance that makes them feel alive. It's the presence to it. It is stepping away from all of that stuff going on in our head that limits us and makes us fearful, makes us feel separate. At a moment like that, you're one with everything because you're not thinking about anything that would separate you as an individual from anything else. So here is the great irony of human life. You ready? We will never feel better, more connected, more loved, more grateful. Life will never have more meaning or feel more fulfilling than those moments when our sense of self, our entire sense of separation, falls away. Think of falling in love. Why do you think they call it falling? When you fall in love, everything about your individual self falls away and is joined to the beloved. At that moment, we are one with everything and everyone. And yet, that same falling away of the sense of self is exactly what we fear in death. Do you see it? In your life experience, you never feel more alive than when your sense of self has fallen away. And yet that's exactly what we fear in death. Why? Do we see it as permanent? Whatever it is, the unknown on the other side. But if we really think about it, the falling away of the sense of self is what makes us feel connected and one and loved and grateful and alive. And we fear that in death. If you think about why we're here, why are we here? As a human species, why are we here on this planet? What are we here to do? I think Brene Brown gives us a pretty good clue, if you know who she is. She says, I started with connection. Because by the time you're a social worker for 10 years, what you realize is that connection is why we're here. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. This is what it's all about. The ability to feel connected is neurobiologically, that's how we're wired. It's why we're here. I think she's right. It's all about connection. Why are we here? We're here to learn to value connection and oneness over everything else in our experience. Because when we value that more, that will be what our life is all about. Heaven is the state of absolute connection, the state of absolute oneness. But we got to die to get there. We have to let our sense of self fall away from us to get there. Either the little death in contemplation or in death itself. It's just as Jesus said. It's what he's been saying all along. Everything about him is, let your sense of self fall away. If you want to find your life, you got to lose it. If you can't pick up your cross daily, deny yourself, right? Deny yourself. Then you can't go where I'm going. This is what Jesus is all about. The Hebrews themselves understood this so well. They understood it so well that they named their God unity. They named their God oneness. That's what Eloah means. Allah in Aramaic. It means one thing. It means multiple things functioning as one. In their central prayer at Deuteronomy 6, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, echad, one. It was all about oneness, all about connection. That's what they were trying to get across with the very words that they used to describe the Godhead. And then when they described humans, humans were the ones who were living between heaven and earth, between that oneness and unity and connection of God's domain and the individual form and function and diversity of ours here on earth. But our job as humans was to bring heaven to earth and earth to heaven, to merge the two. For us to be able to see with the double sight as we go through all the moments of our lives, to be able to deal with the diversity, deal with the separation and sense of it, at the same time see the oneness underneath, the task within the task that we often talk about here. So our purpose, of course, is to make our purpose the same as God's purpose, which is connection, which is oneness. If we can do that, then everything starts to change. Now, this seems simple, doesn't it, on its face? And it is. It's a simple concept. But why is it so hard? Simple, but why is it so hard? I'm going to read a little one-line story from the Desert Fathers. And Desert Fathers and Mothers were incredible people in the 3rd and 4th century when Christianity was becoming allied with Roman power in the 4th century, when Constantine adopted it, and eventually they made it the state religion of Rome. That's when the cart went off the wheels, according to the Desert Fathers and Mothers, who were looking for a purer form of connection. Once their church became allied with political and temporal power, they no longer recognized it. And so they fled out into the deserts of Egypt and Judea to try to find a purer expression. And what's left to us over the centuries, millennia, of their sayings is beautiful. If you get a chance to read, this comes from the Way of the Desert, The Wisdom of the Desert by Thomas Merton. It's a collection of sayings that he translated from the Latin. But listen to this. An elder said, "If you see a young monk by his own will climbing to heaven, take him by the foot and throw him to the ground, because what he is doing is not good for him." I want you to think about that. If you see a young monk climbing to heaven, take him by the foot and throw him to the ground. It's not a good thing. Now, what's wrong with climbing to heaven? Doesn't that sound like a good thing to you? Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? Isn't so much of how we read the scriptures telling us to do that? We got Jacob's ladder, after all. We got all these other images. And haven't we been taught that we're supposed to climb, ascend? So what is this about climbing? What's bad about it? Well, he's got that little 2-word phrase in there. He's doing it by his own will. Okay, well, that can be a little check for us. It's by his own will, but he's still climbing to heaven. He's climbing to God. Why in the world is that not good? What is in that little one-liner that we can use to help ourselves when we're wondering why it's so hard for us to get to heaven? A line we've been talking about in here a lot is that the means we use must match the ends that we seek. And if that needs a little explanation, it's that Jesus said that like breeds like. You're not going to get, figs from a thorn bush. Like breeds like. Whatever we do to get to a certain end, it has to be the same if we actually want to get there. Because the means that we use actually produce the ends that we're using. It just works that way. We can't work for unity by being disconnected. We can't get to love by being fearful. It doesn't work that way. The means we use must match the ends that we seek. When we're talking about heaven, we have to understand heaven is not a goal to achieve. It's not something that we acquire. We think of kingdom this way, and the language doesn't help us to enter kingdom. We think of possessing kingdom and entering it somehow. It's not there to be achieved. It's not there to be acquired. Jesus said it's not out there at all. It's within you. It's coming from a completely different place. We get the kingdom not by the outside in, but the inside out. Heaven is not a goal to achieve. It's not something to acquire. It's a reality that is right here and right now that we can realize. But we don't acquire it because it's already ours. We really are already one with everything, each other and God, whether we realize it or not, whether our minds will let us see that connection or not, or forever show us the separation that creates so many of the problems in our lives. Heaven is here. It is a basic reality of life, and we can realize it if we relinquish, not try to acquire, but relinquish everything that obscures our vision, our way of absolutely seeing what is. If we're striving to obtain something that we already possess, well, that's further going to obscure the view of what heaven really is. And not only that, but striving, working, trying to perform, climbing, intensifies our sense of self, which is the opposite of heaven. Heaven is the loss of self, the sense of self, the connection with everything. And kingdom is exactly the same. It's the quality of life we have when we are connected, when we are present. So spiritual life is not about acquiring what we don't have. It's relinquishing everything that obscures what is already ours. And this sense of self is what Jesus is telling us over and over needs to go. At least in our prayer time. Obviously, we need our sense of self when we're just living life and working and transacting and doing business and doing the things that we do. But to have that second sight, that underneath that illusion of separation, the reality is oneness and connection. Heaven is the reality. Kingdom is the reality. And so Jesus is always telling us to let go. Stop clinging. What did he say to Mary that we read last week? Stop clinging to me. You're clinging to an old idea of relationship. It's always moving. It's always dynamic. There's something new here after Easter, after the resurrection. There's something new here every day. Are we willing to stop clinging to what is past and flow with what is now? If we can do that, we can stay abreast of the Spirit. We can flow with the Spirit. And so we've been looking at Matthew 7, the first 11 verses so far. We're going to look at the 12th one today as this cohesive block. And we're going to do it again today. So let's take a look at Matthew 7, starting in verse 1. Do not judge, so that you will not be judged. For in the way that you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. We talked about all of these last week in the context of what are you still clinging to? What is the last thing that you're clinging to? Just like Mary clinging to Jesus' feet. Don't cling to me. He's trying to get us to let go of those things that we're clinging to that we don't even realize are limiting us, that we don't even realize are the glass ceiling, the veil that keeps us from seeing what is really here. And in the context here of judgment, what do we use to judge typically? Well, we use the law, don't we? We use the law, we use church doctrine, we use whatever we use, but stop clinging to the code of the law. All of Matthew 5 is Jesus trying to get us to do that. Let go of this death grip on the code of the law. Stop trying to climb to heaven on the back of the law, if you will. It's not going to work. You cannot obey your way into heaven or into kingdom. It doesn't work. It needs a completely different kind of transformation that comes from the inside out. Jesus is saying, stop clinging to the code of the law and simply become people of relationship. Really see the person that you're with. Stop trying to fit them in like a square peg into a round hole into what section of the law that you think applies in this particular encounter. And just be. Can you just laugh? Can you just see them as a fellow human being? Can you connect? This transformation comes from the inside, not the outside. And in terms of judgment, the rules that we try to impose on others have already been imposed on us. That separation that we see with the other as we judge them is already keeping us shelved and apart from everything that we say we hold dear, everything that we say that we really want out of life. Stop clinging to the code of the law in a contractual or transactional way and become people of relationship. Matthew 7:6, do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. We talked about this one because it sounds condescending. It sounds exclusionary, and it has been used that way for centuries by Christians to exclude others who are not up to snuff as we see it. But what is holy given to dogs would be the Torah. The words there connect to the Torah. That is the lifeblood of the Judaic faith. Don't give it to a dog that is not ready to receive it. And don't give your pearls of wisdom. Pearls were a symbol of wisdom in Jewish thought at the time. Don't give them to swine. Obviously, still not ready to accept it. That doesn't mean that they are less than you. It just means they're not ready yet. See people where they are. Meet them where they are. Don't just fly over at 30,000 feet and drop tracks. Drop what you think they need. Get to know them first. Establish relationship first. That's what Jesus always did. And stop clinging to the code of your own righteousness. Just become people of compassion. See where people are, not where you think they should be. Don't look for reasons to exclude them, but how you can include them into your life and meet them right where they are at the point of their need. See what love requires and see if you can provide it. Verses 7 to 8, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. I see this one as stop clinging to your work ethic. Stop clinging to your own performance. This probably more than all the others speaks of climbing to heaven, because it looks like if we just do this heavy lifting, if we keep doing the climbing, then God is going to meet us and grant us everything that we want. But we talked about this in the context of prayer. But Jesus is saying, stop relying on your performance and work ethic. Stop relying on your discipline and just become people of prayer. But prayer understood as the Hebrews understood prayer deeply. The word for ask is selu, which is related to selah in Hebrew, which means to pray. But it has the context of that hunting term where you lay a snare in the forest and you cover it over, and then you retreat to a blind and you wait expectantly for something to happen. It's that hair trigger kind of awareness. It's that deep sense of presence, expectantly waiting for something to happen. It's that kind of leaning in that is the sense of prayer. If we are doing that, we're going to treat every encounter very differently because of our presence, because of our expectation of connection at every turn. Very different. And then at verse 9, or what man is there among you who, when his son asks for a loaf, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, he will not give him a snake, will he? If you then, being evil, bisha, unripe, immature, unready, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give what is good to those who ask him? We can probably say that he's telling us here to stop clinging to our circumstances. Stop clinging to the need for certainty. If we're asking for a loaf, if we're asking for a fish, or we're asking for an egg in Luke, we don't get a scorpion, right? But if we're asking for those things, we're still asking for that physical nurturing, that physical certainty. We want and need certain things in order to be able to move forward. Jesus is saying, stop clinging to that need for certainty. There is no certainty in this life. He's saying, become people of trust. Trust is different than certainty. Trust is the experience of the trustworthiness of the other that allows us to have conviction about them, but it's still not certainty. We have human friends that we trust implicitly, at least in certain areas. Maybe we don't trust them with our checking account, but we trust them to show up on time to dinner, right? And we just know. We don't have to call them. We don't have to worry about they're going to show up. But we also know it's not absolutely certain. They may not show up. It just would be way out of character. But can we become people of trust where we don't worry about these things anymore? We don't plan for them. We don't stay awake at night worrying about them. Without certainty, we can still have conviction if we have trust. This is where Jesus is trying to take us. become people of relationship, people of compassion, people of prayer, and people of trust. If we can do that, then all the rest takes care of itself. Seek first kingdom and all else is added, right? And all of these are leading us to what I consider a summary verse at verse 12. This is where he brings it all together. In everything, therefore. Now, whenever you see therefore, you got to look to see what it's there for, right? Come on, you've heard that one before. What is it connecting to? Well, it's connecting to everything that has preceded it in chapter 7. In everything, therefore, treat people the same way you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets. Or King James, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. That's our famous way of hearing it, but it's the same idea here. This is the law and the prophets. That's the shorthand for all of the sacred writing of the Jews. The law and the prophets. Their Bible was divided into 3 parts: the Torah, the law, and the prophets. The writings. So Jesus is saying everything that we have in our tradition comes right down to this one verse. Right down to this one, what we call the golden rule, right? But it's not a rule. If it were just a rule, it would completely miss the point. We'd just be adding more rules to obey, right? This isn't a rule. And not only that, did you know all religions have a golden rule in them? Just every religion and philosophy. Let me just give you a few of them so you can see. Because if we're just following rules, then they're not going to distinguish us from anything else. Judaism, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. This is the whole Torah, and the rest is all commentary. Go and learn it. So they put it in the negative, and Jesus puts it in the positive. Buddhism, treat not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful. Confucianism, one word which sums up the basis of all good conduct, loving kindness. Do not do to others what you do not want done to yourself. Hinduism, this is the sum of duty. Do not do to others what would cause pain if done to you. Islam, not one of you truly believes until you wish for others what you wish for yourself. Jainism, one should treat all creatures in the world as one would like to be treated. Taoism, regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain and your neighbor's loss as your own loss. All of these. Baha'i, lay not on any soul a load that you would not wish to be laid upon you, and desire not for anyone the things you would not desire for yourself. Even the Jewish rendition predates Jesus by almost 100 years. So this wasn't unique with Jesus, but he's using it in such a way that it's not just an ethical code. He's not just trying to get us to follow another rule. The golden rule is not a rule. If it were, it would be the same as all of these. It's not about obedience or following this. It is a picture of connection in action. As you go through everything that has happened and everything Jesus has said in verse 7 up to this point, what you realize, what Jesus is talking about, if we can become people of relationship and compassion, of prayer and of trust, then everything that we do will look like connection. It will be connection in action. We would never do to another what we didn't want done to ourselves. We would see them with the basic respect and decency that oneness engenders in us. And it wouldn't feel like restriction. We wouldn't have to think hard about it. It would just flow to us. I want to read one more little description. And this comes from the Taoist tradition. But listen to this and see if it doesn't sound just like Jesus. It's called The True Man. And it was written by Chuang Tzu in probably the 3rd century BCE. What is meant by a true man or woman? The true men of old were not afraid when they stood alone in their views. No great exploits, no plans. If they failed, no sorrow, no self-congratulation in success. They scaled cliffs, never dizzy, plunged in water, never wet, walked through fire and were not burnt. Thus, their knowledge reached all the way to God. The true men of old slept without dreams, woke without worries. Their food was plain. They breathed deep. True men breathe from their heels. Others breathe with their gullets, half strangled. In dispute, they heave up arguments like vomit. Where the fountains of passion lie deep, the heavenly springs are soon dry. The true men of old knew no lust for life, no dread of death. Their entrance was without gladness, their exit yonder, without resistance. Easy come, easy go. They did not forget where from, nor ask where to, nor drive grimly forward, fighting their way through life. They took life as it came, gladly, took death as it came, without care, and went away, yonder, yonder. They had no mind to fight the way. They did not try, by their own contriving, to help the way along. These are the ones we call true men. Minds free, thoughts gone, brows clear, faces serene. Were they cool? Only as cool as autumn. Were they hot? No hotter than spring. All that came out of them came quiet, like the four seasons. I love that. Spiritual life is not about climbing to heaven. It's falling to heaven. We fall to heaven just as we fall in love. How do you know if you're falling in love? How do you know if you've fallen in love? All the songs make sense? Yeah? Who here has fallen in love? Everybody's fallen in love, right? And maybe it's romantically, and that's what we first think of when we think of falling in love, but how about with a child? Don't you fall in love with your children, your grandchildren? Grandchildren, I know you do. How about your dog or your cat? Your fish or your snake? Come on, some people get into that kind of thing. We've all fallen in love, haven't we? And when you did you work at it? Did you have to really work at it? Did you have to grunt it out? Did you have to climb into it? Right? Actually, what you might have done is worked against it, right? That's probably more likely. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't go there. I certainly can't go there again. And that's why they call it falling. We don't work at it. We fall into it. By the very nature of us just losing that sense of self, we just open up completely and we fall into heaven. We fall into love. It's like a kid. Did you do this when you were a kid? I know you did. Hot summer days. Come right up to the edge of the pool, turn around backward, water over your shoulder, and you just stand there, maybe arms this way, arms out, and you just push down with your toes, and you feel yourself going back and back. And all of a sudden, you reach that tipping point of no return. You're done, and you're going to fall. And last time you looked, there was water in the pool, but is there still water in the pool? I don't know. And then you feel that hard, cold slap of the water, and you go down and come up giggling and screaming, and then you run to do it again. You just jumped in. But that's what it feels like, doesn't it? You're pushing down with your toes, and you look, they're all white against the tile, and push down. And there's that moment. You just know it's coming, and you know when it's there, and you're done. You're falling. There's nothing you can do. The train has left the station, and you're on it. That's what it feels like. And that's what it's always going to feel like. Falling in love, falling to heaven. It's going to feel like that tipping point when we fall backward. There's no going back. We're done. What's the difference between liking someone and falling in love? When we like someone, we can keep them at a safe distance, can't we? We can make sure we don't lean past that tipping point. We're still in control. We still got our balance. Falling means being completely open, completely vulnerable. And now, as a vulnerable person in love, you have given yourself completely over to be hurt by somebody else. They can do that to you. And of course, It will happen. Whenever you fall in love, you are going to get hurt. I said there's no certainty in life, but that's pretty close to it. You're going to get hurt somehow, some way, because everything changes. And when it does, it's going to hurt if you have fallen in love. If you have put yourself in this position where your heart is now on your sleeve. So the question is, we should be asking ourselves, what if I do get hurt? You know what the better question is? What if I don't? That's really the more important question. Because to never get hurt means that you have never become vulnerable. And if you've never become vulnerable, then you've never, ever been connected. You don't know what kingdom feels like. You don't know what heaven feels like. Because you never allowed yourself to step outside yourself, to lose that sense of self and imagined control. To be connected at this level with anything or anyone else. Our purpose here in life is not to stay safe. Our purpose here in life is not to remain innocent, not to keep smooth skin, Botox. Yeah? We're here to get hurt. We're here to get all used up and wrinkly and pruny. This is why we're here. We're here to make mistakes and learn from them. We're here to lose our innocence, but find our way back to the garden again by choice. Knowing what we know and bringing that back to that place of pure connection is everything about why God created us the way he did. With the free will to make everything miserable, but also to actually engage in pure love with the choice that we have. Take a look at the bottom of your handouts if you want to follow along. C.S. Lewis said this about as good as it gets. Take a look. He writes, "There is no safe investment. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even to an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. The alternative to tragedy, or at least to the risk of tragedy, is damnation. The only place outside heaven where you can be perfectly safe from all the dangers and perturbations of love is hell. I think this is exactly what Jesus is saying here in Matthew 7, 1-12. He's saying, come out from behind your defenses. It's the only way this works. You want the way to the Father? The only way to the Father, this is it. Come out from behind your defenses, from behind the law, from behind your sense of righteousness, from behind your own performance, from your certainty, and above all, from your sense of self. Come out from behind your defenses. Let it go. Let it fall away. Relinquish all of that so that you can simply connect, so that you can be one again, so that you can see everyone else as your other self, and then you can act and choose accordingly. That's really it. How do we know that we're open? How do we know that we are flowing with Spirit? How do we know that we are connection in action, falling to heaven? Well, when all of Jesus' songs make sense, that will be one way. These crazy red letters that we've been reading, his giant and paradoxical sayings that we've been reading, when that starts making sense to you, whatever seems so confusing at first and will continue to be confusing until we start to fall with him into connection, into love, and then we see the sense of it. We see where he's going with this. Let go. Stop clinging to all our striving and climbing. Let go of trying to make names for ourselves rather than just letting self go. When we can just lean back until there's no turning back, feel that tipping point, and let gravity have its way, we will remain outside when all we have to do is fall to heaven. Let's pray. Father, help us fall. It really should be so easy. Falling is just the absence of balance. We can find that anytime we want. But it is our fear that keeps us clinging, keeps us holding on to whatever shred of ourselves that we think we can control. But in you is the consummation of everything. When we lose ourselves in you, it's the safest, most beautiful place we can be. Help us to push through. Help us to experience more and more in our prayer life and in our waking life the sensation of losing ourselves in the conversation, in the other person, in the silence, so that more and more we can experience the connection that is in that falling away, and less fear losing that and entering into whatever you have for us, Lord. Thank you for the life and the love, the word, everything that you've given us, so that we can find our way back to you. Because when we do that, then it's really ours. And we take from this life everything that we need to join you in the next. Thank you for your love, Lord. Never let us forget we can only love because you loved us first. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's all stand.